back to this Black Hat Fast Chat video series. I'm Terry Sweeney, contributing editor with Black Hat, and I'm joined today by Hank Schless, Senior Manager of Security Solutions for Lookout. Hank, thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely, Terry. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to chat.
So our topic concerns mobile security, and it is a curious thing that there isn't more news or headlines about cyber attacks that affect mobile users, both smartphones and tablets. Give us some insight there. Why do you think that happens?
Well, I think there are a few levels to it, Terry. I think that the first part of it is that attackers do use mobile devices as that vulnerable entry point into backend infrastructure to access company data. Considering how much of it is actually stored on devices, much less accessed through some cloud services and all that, cloud-based services from mobile devices. But I really think it's because people don't have the visibility they need, to include mobile devices in basically that endpoint detection and response, or EDR, process when it comes to threat hunting and instant investigations, some of the post-mortem stuff that happens when an incident does occur, which is interesting because everyone has at least one mobile device. Whether it's a personal phone and a work phone, or a phone and a tablet, not only do you have multiple devices, but you also have personal devices, you have corporate devices, you have managed, unmanaged. There's a whole swath of these things. And it's just, I think we don't hear about it because people just don't really have the visibility they need to see that these devices are actually a pretty consistent entry point for malicious attackers.
Thanks for that. I think that's good context. What about the actual threat landscape? The malware and the threats and the risk have to be out there just as they are with any other connected device. Mm-hmm. What does the threat landscape look like for mobile devices?
Vast, to put it in one word. I was talking to another colleague a few weeks ago, and he's a few years older than me. He's been in security for longer than I have, and he said, and he's done a lot of more. He started kind of more in data center security, and now is more in cloud security. And he said mobile security is the biggest problem no one's talking about right now, which was interesting. Obviously, working for a mobile security company, I was encouraged to hear that he acknowledged that it was a big problem, but it is a big issue, and it's one that, given that threat landscape and what it looks like, people really, I really don't think people are talking about enough. And when you look at it, in the past year or so, especially, remote work really forced some pretty radical adjustments for security teams. I think it's pretty undeniable. And from a mobile perspective, the first thing people did, the first couple steps, which were the right first steps to take, was they increased their VPN licenses and maybe implemented a mobile device manager, MDM, which was a great first step. But the problem is that neither of those provide true security to the device. And in the first 100 days or so of the pandemic, really kind of when we measured this from when work from home really started, we actually saw almost a 30% increase in the use of mobile devices by remote workers. So people were obviously relying on these devices. Now, in terms of what the landscape actually looks like, mobile phishing has been the biggest and most quickly growing issue for a couple of years now. But really, we saw it in the beginning of 2020 and through the year. We saw, I think it was, I wrote a report on this, I think it was almost a 40% increase in mobile phishing between the last quarter of 2019 and the end of the first quarter of 2020. So obviously there was use of the pandemic, to socially engineer people. But even since it's cooled off a little bit since then, it's still significantly higher than it was last year. And I'm happy to go into some industry stats and all that as well. But yeah, please dive in. Yeah, what's up?
A question there. Do users of mobile devices somehow think, oh, I'm handled with phishing. I use it on my laptop. I don't need to worry about it with my mobile. That doesn't make sense to me. But shine some light there, if you would.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that people know that phishing is always an issue, but since smart, our phones are so personal, right? And so we inherently trust them to be safe.
Right.
Especially, and this is not throwing shade by any means, but there's sort of this perception that iPhones are completely safe and they don't need anything else. Well, if you look at some of the bigger issues this year, a lot of it had to do with Apple operating systems being released with some pretty serious vulnerabilities and all that. At the same time, the same thing happened on the Android side. But I think it's also that when you look at what phishing looks like on mobile, attackers really do use social engineering a lot more frequently, and honestly, they've gotten really good at it to the point where even the best trained, if you train your employees on or an individual trains themselves on how to spot a phishing attack on PC or on a computer, it's going to look nothing like that on a mobile device, especially when it comes through something like a personal social media app or something like that.
Right. As you scan the threat horizon for mobiles, what do you see? What's really informing that picture?
Yeah, I mean, I think the number one thing right now, I think, is privacy on everyone's mind. I mean, you look at what Apple has done in the last year or so, requiring developers to put the nutrition labels of data access and privacy on their applications, and I think that's really and you look at like the privacy issues around things like TikTok last year and some of the international implications there. I think that ended up being a little bit of a bigger deal than it really was, but it did shine light on the fact that people are, again, trust these devices to be safe. They trust the app developers to implement safe practices, and sometimes there's something that from a personal perspective might not seem that bad. Like, do I really care if my audio recordings from a social media app are going to a server in China? I mean, I'm not planning on saying anything damning or anything that isn't already public knowledge. So not really. But from a corporate perspective, that might be a huge violation of some sort of internal or international policy.
Well, so you've got mobile phone makers installing, baking it really into the device itself, baking good security, privacy, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Users still seem reluctant to go that extra mile to install privacy and protections on their phones.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they wouldn't give it a second thought for their desktops or their laptops. How do you explain that disconnect?
I mean, that's one that has always shocked me a little bit. To your point, you would never. Everyone has at least antivirus of some sort on every computer they've ever had since forever, really. Our phones have even more data, even more access than I believe than our laptops or our computers have or ever will have. I think there's a shift going on. I think people are recognizing the risks that are associated with smartphones, tablets. It's great they enable us for everything we love to do. They've really become the center point of everyone's life. But you look at how let's just say, for example, Apple has now released the M1 chip in their laptops. And actually, I got one myself a few weeks ago. I love it. It's super fast. It's great. But you look at that, and I think it's one of those signs that these laptops, desktops are moving more towards that mobile operating system model. And so when it comes to installing something like a mobile security product on a device, especially a personal one, I think people will get more comfortable with that idea as the two things start to look more similar and they get more educated on what risks really are out there from a mobile perspective.
Shifting gears slightly, there's been a long-standing debate about using solutions or services that may be cloud-based or that are hosted on your own premises.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen this throughout basically all the IT functions. More recently in security, because people have been a little hesitant to turn over the keys of the kingdom to a third party. I'm wondering if this same cloud-based versus on-prem debate is also raging within the mobility world.
Yeah, that's actually a great question. And it's one that we get a lot. because it is a big question. We've actually we've heard a lot more about it recently with the example of the Microsoft Exchange server hack that was exposed just recently, and that's been all over the place. I think we all know about at this point. There were a handful of 0 days that were being exploited in on-prem versions of Exchange server, and you can always say this would happen, that would happen, but in this case, if this were a cloud-based service, there would have been patches pushed out within hours of discovery, and people would be for the most part taken care of. But since you're relying on the individual organizations, and I think it was tens of thousands of organizations using this, right, using this on-prem version, they all now have to scramble to patch it themselves, which creates, and you think about the lag time that happens between when the exploit is, or the vulnerability is exposed, attackers start exploiting it, and then there's always a lag time between then and when the update happens. So on the mobile front, and I think really on the security front as a whole, I think this just shows how cloud-based platforms really are a necessity versus their on-premise counterparts. I mean, the rest of the world has shifted that way, and especially now with these highly distributed workforces, everyone, whether work from home will stay in some capacity, I think, for a very long time. Security teams, IT teams, mobility teams, whoever handles this, they need to be able to push coverage out over the air, and they need to make sure that they need to make sure they have ways to access the ability to push that out. They don't want to have to go into the office to push something out from something that's on-prem. And I think also from a business continuity standpoint, it really helps with that, because if an employee's device is being slowed down by a solution, or sorry, by a security tool of some sort, by an on-prem one, since they usually use more resources on the device, they might get frustrated and uninstall the solution as a whole, and that just opens up a whole nother can of worms. Sure. And then finally, my last piece on it would be that trying to think what the best. I think it's probably that as you scale up and down, the cloud-based solutions just offer that much more flexibility. If you're hiring a whole bunch of remote employees, you need a way to be able to make sure that their access to your back end and your resources is safe.
Sure. Hank, a related issue seems to be the advent of zero trust in so many different security management frameworks, especially with the whole work from home scenario, which seems to become the dominant networking model, at least for enterprises, and the decentralization of security. Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about how zero trust is being greeted, or what demand you sense for it in the mobile world.
Yeah, I actually, when I get asked about this, I like to bring up a point that our chief strategy officer made kind of at the start of all this that I think is really interesting. And he said that security teams have gone from monitoring a few offices, maybe a handful of global offices, to now having to secure thousands of home offices. So when you think about it in that kind of almost in a visual way, that really, when I heard him say that, it really kind of hit home for me, because it's like, yeah, it's not just making sure that all the hundreds or thousands of devices in one office are secure and basically healthy enough to access the network. It's now going out to everyone's home and making sure that there's now another layer of added complexity and making sure that those devices are again safe to access resources. So when you look at it from that point, to really implement zero trust, you need to be including mobile devices in that strategy, because you think about how interconnected they are. And I mean, like I mentioned at the start of our conversation, we all use Google Workspace, Office 365, all these cloud-based productivity collaboration platforms to get work done from home. So you don't want to have, to really carry out the philosophy of zero trust and assume that no device is safe until proven otherwise. You really need to make sure that you can assess the risk of that device before it connects in, without interrupting that kind of continuity and that productivity that everyone wants to have from wherever they are.
Well, you've certainly got me thinking differently about my iPhone and what I'll be doing after we sign off here. Hank, thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me on. It's been a real pleasure.
We've been talking with Hank Schless from Security Vendor Lookout. This has been Terry Sweeney for Black Hat. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.